Welcome to Billy's Backlog, my name is Billy S, and last year at E3, Metroid Dread was revealed to the world. The fifth installment in the long-running 2D Metroid series, and the latest entry in the Metroid franchise overall, and for longtime Metroid fans, it was a moment of catharsis. I didn't know this at the time, as I only started playing the series after Dread's announcement, but Yoshio Sakamoto, the producer of Metroid, originally planned Metroid Dread 2 decades ago after Fusion's development, with Dread becoming the poster child for vaporware video games as more and more time passed with no new updates on the project. Sakamoto ultimately confirmed that Metroid Dread took so long to come to fruition because back in the early 2000s, the technical limitations of the hardware on offer couldn't do the themes and ideas conceived for Dread justice, and so Dread faded into obscurity along with the 2D Metroid series. And that should have been the end of it, but along came a Spanish video game developer, Mercury Steam. Having previously worked on the Castlevania Lords of Shadow trilogy in the early 2010s, they wanted a crack at developing for both sides of the Metroidvania. In 2015, a Nintendo Life report stated they had attempted to work on a Metroid prototype for Wii U and 3DS, but it was turned down. This was revealed to be a remake of Metroid Fusion, and while the pitch was rejected, Sakamoto, impressed by the team's love of Metroid, brought them on to help develop Metroid Samus Returns, a remake of Metroid 2: The Return of Samus on the 3DS. From there, it's history. Samus Returns was a solid remake that showed the team at Mercury Steam had a real understanding of Metroid, and Sakamoto allowed them to develop Metroid Dread, giving them an entirely new original game to craft from the ground up, as the Switch finally allowed Sakamoto's vision of Metroid 5 to be a reality. And wouldn't you know, Metroid Dread released in October 2021 to critical acclaim from both critics and audiences. And it kickstarted my love of the Metroid franchise, as while I couldn't purchase the game at the time, it did inspire me to go back and play through the rest of the Metroid series instead. Zero Mission, Return of Samus, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, the Prime Trilogy, even AM2R. I did miss out on Samus Returns though, couldn't find a copy of it, but I digress. Discovering and consuming Metroid content became a large portion of my life in the last few months of 2021, and I don't regret it one bit. Getting to discover all of these new worlds and take control of Samus in her adventures just felt empowering and exciting. Metroid is a staggeringly consistent franchise in terms of releases. I said a staggeringly consistent franchise in terms of releases. You don't count! I had very high hopes for Metroid Dread, and when I finally purchased the game, I was ready to experience that rush I got when playing my favorite Metroidvanias like Hollow Knight or Metroid Prime for the first time, exploring a brand new planet and just letting the game take me along for the ride. I trained for this with every other Metroid game. I was ready. Already, the mood has been set. You boot the game up and you're greeted by that opening menu that sets the tone, the cyber red hues, the flash of an Emmy, followed by the reveal of the title, and that haunting, foreboding music. It sets the tone immediately, providing the sense of apprehension that bleeds into the main game itself. You're then given a brightness slider, which is something I wasn't quite expecting. I decided to crank that shit up because YouTube always makes your footage darker after an upload, and I wanted to see all the lovely goodness that the world had to offer. Then, it was off to the difficulty select screen. Now, at launch, you only had access to normal mode, but following the recent Metroid Dread update announced during the February Nintendo Direct, a rookie mode was added, which decreased the damage taken from bosses and increased the amount of health and ammo you receive from pickups. It's an easy mode catering towards people who don't have much experience with Metroid games, and acts as an accessibility feature allowing people to explore Planet ZDR at a more leisurely pace. Metroid Dread is a very hard game on your first playthrough, so it surprises me that this mode wasn't included in the base game, but I think it's a fantastic addition in that it gives players an easier time, but doesn't change any of the puzzles, world layout, or enemy attack patterns. So you're having to improve your skills while controlling Samus, you're just less likely to die while doing so. Upon beating the game, you unlock hard mode, which makes a very small change that I can confirm definitely changes the way the game is played. Enemies have a little more health and do a lot more damage to Samus, forcing you to plan your battles and master the game's mechanics to do well. Beat hard mode, and you'll unlock the other new mode added in the last Metroid Dread update, Dread mode. Taking on a Dread playthrough is the hardest challenge this game has to offer, as if you take any damage from any enemy or trap, you game over. It forces you to be precise and perfect with your movements and shots, and will test your knowledge of Planet ZDR to its limits. It is worth noting, however, that only enemy damage and traps will one-shot you. Rooms with extreme temperatures, as well as lava, act as they would in a normal playthrough, slowly sapping your health. So those energy tanks are worth collecting in this mode. Now, to be clear, I recorded my first playthrough of Metroid Dread on normal mode, 100% completion, but I have completed this game 5 times. 2 normal mode playthroughs, with the second being a sub 4-hour run to collect all the hidden ending gallery pictures tied to that mode, and 2 hard mode playthroughs, with the second also being a sub 4-hour run to collect the other hidden ending gallery pictures tied to that mode, plus 1 Dread mode playthrough because I was that engrossed and invested in the game. So suffice it to say, I have a lot of experience with Metroid Dread and I want to share my thoughts with you. So let's jump right in to Planet ZDR. The game opens on an unskippable prologue sequence that catches you up with the lore of the 2D titles, styled as a report from Samus herself. You're introduced to the Metroids and the X-Parasites, before the game recaps the events of Metroid Fusion, complete with beautiful art and a fantastic new rendition of the Super Metroid theme playing in the background. It's a nice way to introduce players to the story so far, especially seeing as Metroid Dread was bound to pick up a host of new fans who had never played a Metroid game before. Though I will say I do wish there was voice acting for this sequence. Controversial topic, given the game who shall not be named, but I felt this info dump was a bit on the slow side, and having someone speaking the words would make it easier to digest. I would have also loved an option to skip this sequence in subsequent playthroughs. An idea would be that when you start a new game, a pop-up appears stating, "Do you wish to see Samus's report on the story so far?" with a yes or no option. It's a solid recap, I just really wanted to get into the gameplay, and on repeat playthroughs, it can be tedious to sit through. But the moment the opening cutscene hits, nothing else matters, because if there is one aspect of Dread that needs to be praised above all else, the cinematography and animations of the cutscenes are bloody flawless. As far as I'm aware, it's all done in-engine, and because of this, the game is able to transition from cutscene to gameplay instantly. I've always loved that level of seamlessness, and it was something I actually wanted from Pokemon Legends Arceus, the last game I ended up reviewing before this. So going from that game to this, it was like Christmas came early. There's a level of polish in these cutscenes that just makes them so much fun to watch. Just look at the way the ship dodges those asteroids, it's so clean. We also get our first peep of actual voice acting in the game.
We'll soon be entering ZDR's atmosphere,
with Samus's ship sounding like Alexa if she was running on Windows 95, as well as Adam, the AI from Fusion, who...
The risk clearly outweighs the reward.
I gotta say, I didn't expect to sound like that. I don't know what I was expecting, to be fair, and it took a while for the Adam voice to grow on me. I really appreciated the subtitles at first because the mechanical voices were just very hard to understand. The Galactic Federation could use a Blue Yeti mic and some better voices. You could get it for cheap on Space Amazon. Come on, Bezos. We then cut to Samus, unconscious, wearing a stripped down version of her power suit. followed by a brief flashback that introduces us to the antagonist of the game, the mysterious Chozo warrior Ravenbeak. And it's here that I can start gushing about Samus's characterization. You'll see it throughout this whole video, but I firmly believe Mercury Steam have created the most accurate portrayal of Samus we have ever had, and all without dialogue. From the way she steps off the elevator, takes a few steps, and then instantly gets into her armed stance when she notices Ravenbeak, she doesn't even hesitate, walking towards him, a confident swagger in her hips, while her upper body is locked in place. Shantae, you stay, Samus. She doesn't even hesitate when the battle with Ravenbeak starts, blasting the Chozo without mercy or hesitation. That counter, followed by the super missile that cuts Ravenbeak's eye, fantastic! It's also great to watch on a second playthrough when you realize Ravenbeak is actually using moves from his endgame boss fight. That is attention to detail! But of course, Samus is no match for the feathered creature and falls unconscious after letting out what I can only consider to be a full-on PogChamp. It's not clear what happens to Samus at the end of this cutscene. I assumed Ravenbeak had shot her and knocked her unconscious, but we will get those answers as we play through the game. I just love that last shot of her staring at her hand, basically shrugging off what happened. She's been through this before, she knows she's gonna have to rebuild her suit from the ground up, and this time she's more than prepared to do so. It's another Sunday for Samus Aran. You're then introduced to a brief tutorial room that teaches you the very basics of Dread's gameplay: sliding, the free aim system, climbing, retweet to scare a David Jaffa cake. You're then whisked into a save room where you reconnect with Adam and learn your mission: escape planet ZDR. Now, Adam describes Samus's loss of abilities as physical amnesia, and I really like that term, because it effectively mirrors Samus's experiences and the player's experience controlling her. I've played so many Metroid games now, but you could see from my footage that getting to grips with Dread's control scheme was tough. It was like having physical amnesia. The fact that Dread makes use of every button on the Switch just adds to that layer of information you have to learn to make the best out of Samus's abilities. It's impressive and is part of the difficulty barrier of Dread in general, and it's why I'm pretty happy that they drip feed you each of Samus's abilities as you go, allowing you just enough time to understand a mechanic before they give you the next toy to play with. Now, your journey through Artaria and the early portion of the game will be very linear, although you may not realize it. You see, in Metroidvanias, you're often looking for power-ups which will act as keys that allow you to enter the next area. You have to remember the rooms you visited, obstacles you can't bypass yet, and the problem a lot of Metroidvanias run into is that at a certain point, there will just be so many rooms accessible to the player at any given time that it puts a lot of strain on remembering where you may need to go. The map system will mark specific doors and give you markers if you want to go that route, but Metroid Dread has its own elegant solution to this problem baked into the world design. Game Maker's Toolkit created a fantastic video on this concept called Why You Probably Didn't Get Lost in Metroid Dread, and I'd recommend you check it out, links in the top right corner. But the basic gist of it is Mercury Steam uses a lot of points of no return to box you into specific areas of the game, so that you're never having to remember a ton of different rooms, only the rooms you have access to. Take the first enemy encounter. You slide through this gap, break this block, and you're blocked in, forced to take the right path. Or here, later, when you fall down a water slide and can't climb back up. You'll eventually be able to re-explore all of these areas with more power-ups, and the game definitely opens up the further in you get, but these early sequences are there to ease the player in and keep them on a specific path. Back when the game first released, this was controversial, as sequence breaking is practically a staple of 2D Metroid games, and people were having flashbacks to the linearity of Fusion, and were afraid sequence breaks wouldn't be a thing. But that's not a problem in Dread. Sequence breaking is 100% possible if you've seen the speedruns, and I will cover my favorite sequence breaks to do later in the video as they become relevant. But beyond that aspect, Adam also doesn't guide you through the whole game like he does in Fusion. He'll check in with you every now and then, give you a general mission or an objective, but you're the one who has to figure out how to complete that mission. You're the one who has to do the work and figure out where to go, what power-ups to find, etc, etc. It just so happens that the developers have planned for many different scenarios and can generally lead you in the direction you're supposed to go. This is further enhanced by Samus's upgrades in this game. Very often you will collect a new power-up or upgrade and find yourself where you need to use it to progress just minutes later. Sometimes this takes the form of an obvious teleporter that brings you to the area you need to be in, but other times it's a little more subtle. Take this sequence after getting the morph ball later in the game. You use it to escape the room you're in, and you land near a door with a missile upgrade in front of it. Naturally, you follow the upgrade, and then BAM! You're right where you need to go next. Often, missile upgrades and energy tanks are used like a breadcrumb trail, leading the player around the world, and it works flawlessly. This takes a lot of skill and talent to design a world that's simultaneously open, yet able to direct the player to where they should go next most of the time. It's fascinating game design, and I honestly prefer it to the more open-ended Metroidvania exploration style. As I'm getting older, I have less time to spend on video games, and there's only so much time I can spend being lost before I start to get frustrated or bored. So Metroid Dread's design philosophy just rang true with me, as I never found myself lost. Of course, if you play Metroid games for navigation and figuring out where to go yourself, you may find this approach to be unsatisfactory. It's entirely dependent on the type of player you happen to be. Your first goal is to escape Artaria, and you'll go all across the map, learning everything you need to know for future areas. There's a brief segment after this slide that teaches you how to use the counter move from Samus Returns, only now it can be used while you're moving so you don't lose any momentum, seamlessly slotting into Samus's arsenal. Counter an enemy when this white flash appears and you can one-shot them, gaining extra health and ammo drops as you do. You'll find the flying enemies in the same room are also easily counterable, so they really want you to try this ability out. This leads to the aforementioned point of no return, leading to your first Emmy encounter, and this is your Emmy tutorial. Lucky for Samus, this first Emmy looks like it's seen better days. As you approach, it will pin you and teach you that Emmys can be countered during the capture animation, but only when they flash. This will happen twice with a standard Emmy, and the timing for counters will randomize each time you're caught, meaning you can never feel too comfortable. And trust me, the first time through this game, the Emmy encounters are fraught with tension and terror, really instilling that dread motif the game is running with. But you also learn that the Emmys aren't invincible. In each Emmy zone, you'll find a central core, which you can use to transform your arm cannon into the Omega Blaster, a powerful laser capable of permanently shutting down Emmy units. Of course, once an Emmy has been taken care of, the Omega Blaster goes offline, but those brief moments where the tables are turned and the dynamic shifts as you go from prey to predator, it's one of the best feelings in the game. Beating this whole sequence will ultimately lead you to your first real Emmy zone, where you'll get your proper experience dealing with a fully functioning Emmy. And let me tell you, the shift in atmosphere as you enter one of these areas is palpable. The terrain changes to a mechanical, sterile hue, almost as if the Emmy have been slowly eroding and expanding their range within ZDR, and the music shifts to this technological track with mechanical beeps and boops, seemingly with no rhyme or reason to their placement. It's fantastic. Anytime an Emmy gets close, your controller vibrates, simulating Samus's heartbeat, and also an indicator that you're within an Emmy's range for their echolocation abilities. If you move while within range, it will send out a ping to that Emmy to investigate that location, and until you get the Phantom Cloak ability, there's no way to avoid sending those signals. So for the first few forays into the Artaria Emmy zone, your only option is to, well, run. Maybe you'll need to loop the Emmy around some platforms to get past it. Maybe you'll need to raise a water level while being chased. Maybe you need to break walls with your blaster to keep moving. Whatever the case, your goal is simply to survive. And I had my fair share of deaths just trying to figure out where to go and what to do. Luckily, if you die in one of these sections, you will respawn right at the start of the Emmy zone, as opposed to a previous save point, so you can hop right back into the action the moment you reload. Future playthroughs provide a different experience with Emmy zones, as the fear of the unknown is then replaced with a desire to prove how much you've learned. Speeding through Emmy zones without hesitation is extremely satisfying, and a very effective power trip for the player as you get bolder and bolder over time. Now eventually you will wrap around to the leftmost side of Artaria and gain your first power-up of the game, the Charge Beam, allowing you to open Charge Beam doors. The game then wraps back around to the starting area and allows you to go back through those rooms with your new toy until you reach a previous save room that contains the progression door. And upon entering the next room, you will be greeted with the toughest part of Metroid Dread, a puzzle so devious and cunning that an actual game developer struggled to make progress. You have to shoot the ceiling. Mr. Jaffa Cake, the developer of the original God of War, calls this a failure in game design, when the tutorial literally explains that there are breakable blocks in the environment and that if you reach a dead end, try shooting around. There are enemies on the ceiling where the breakable blocks are located, so that if you try shooting them, chances are you'll hit one of the breakable blocks and find the path easily. There are no other paths to take in the game at this point, as the game cleverly railroads you into a small area, so you'll always be drawn to this room. This is further evidenced by the aesthetic change in the scenery, as this room has vibrant oranges and steampunk vibes, contrasted with the cool blue caverns you've been exploring up to this point. Eventually, after figuring out that difficult puzzle, you'll progress through this new area and start redirecting thermal flows, which will allow you to access the Emmy Zone's central unit. This is a repeated boss fight that's also an ode to Mother Brain, with you having to launch rockets at the central unit while dodging orange rings and laser fire as you do so. These fights are simple, and they do get slightly harder in the game as it goes on, adding either an extra projectile to dodge or having the turrets fire more frequently. But look, with enough missiles and gunfire, the central unit is going to fall very quickly, allowing you to access the Omega Blaster once more. This is where you're also taught about the Omega Stream, your rapid gunfire in this mode, which can be used to melt off the protective casing around doors and the faces of the Emmys. You have to find a straight enough location in the Emmy zone and fire upon each Emmy as they approach you until their faceplate melts away, at which point you can charge the Omega Blaster and unleash a powerful shot to defeat the Emmy. And it's after you defeat your first Emmy that you realize this is how you'll be obtaining some of your most important movement abilities in the game. The first Emmy gives you the Spider Magnet, allowing you to climb on blue magnetic surfaces. The second Emmy gives you the Morph Ball, far later into the game than any other Metroid title, while the third Emmy gives you the Speed Booster. Tying these series staple power-ups to the defeats of each Emmy gives your actions a real sense of weight, and gives you meaningful progression as you continue through Planet ZDR. And by the time you take out your last Emmy, you will feel like you've come so far from where you began. I can't describe how good it feels to have taken out all of these indestructible obstacles by the endgame. I was expecting the Emmys to stick around and be problems to deal with throughout the whole game. So when I actually killed my first proper Emmy, it rewrote how I thought this game's progression system would be handled. It was a nice surprise, and keeps the game feeling fast-paced and enjoyable. So with Spider Magnet in hand, you traverse back through the Emmy zone and oh god, more breakable blocks! Oh, so difficult. Whew. Now, the Emmys are cool, but they ultimately come down to being area mini-bosses, and I think it's time to take a look at one of the most praised aspects of Metroid Dread, the actual bosses. I think it's safe to say that Metroid Dread has some of the best 2D Metroid bosses of all time, rivaling the juggernauts of Super Metroid Ridley and Fusion's Nightmare. This boss has been visible throughout your time in Artaria, attacking creatures and watching you progress using its invisibility to stalk your progress. So now it's time to take it down. But first, let's just appreciate this opening cutscene. Samus admires this Chozo statue, but immediately goes into battle mode once Corpius reveals itself. No hesitation, a missile to the face, and a slide under the body that acts as a hint for the third phase of the fight. Samus is a woman on a mission, and the fight itself is a fantastic introduction to the difficulty of Dread's boss design. Bosses in this game do a lot of damage per hit, forcing you to learn their patterns and figure out when to attack and when to dodge. Every attack is avoidable, even if it may not seem like it at first. And while I hate making these comparisons, the bosses feel very Dark Souls-esque, in that you're learning enemy patterns, you're trying not to get greedy with shots, and you will die a lot. But just like Emmy zones, bosses always have a checkpoint respawning you at the boss door, so you're free to keep jumping back in for more attempts. Corpius has two distinct tail attacks, a swipe and a stab, alongside an acid spit. You need to jump over the swipes and get in close during the stab attack, as Corpius can't do anything when its tail is stuck in the ground, giving you ample chance to unload missiles into its face. Because if you're on the outside of the stab attack, the tail blocks you from doing any damage. If you run out of missiles, be sure to use charge attacks, they work as well. Do enough damage and the boss uses its Phantom Cloak ability to hide itself, aside from a glowing point on its tail. I don't think I need to tell you guys what to do. Corpius uses the same attacks from Phase 1, you just need to pay extra attention to its animations to dodge effectively. You can still shoot missiles at its face, but I wouldn't recommend that until you have played the game a few times. It's one of those things that's better for speedruns. Eventually, this does lead into Phase 3, where Corpius will turn, allowing you to slide underneath it. Side note, this shot is very Gaping Dragon from Dark Souls 1. Now, as you slide, you will notice the white flash that denotes a counterable attack. While I failed this on my first 2 attempts, if you counter this attack, you activate a cinematic grab sequence, and these are effectively interactive cutscenes. Samus will be thrust into a sequence where you're able to freely fire your weapons at any time, doing extra damage to the boss. On top of this, you will also gain health and ammo due to the successful counter, and these are some of the most fun moments in the game. I'm all for these cinematic sequences that feel earned by countering a tough attack, as you're still controlling Samus's weapons, you're still pumping that boss full of missiles, and it allows the animators to flex their muscles, showcasing Samus's badassery as she fires missiles into Corpius's face while pinned between his claw with no fear in her eyes. Every boss fight has these moments, and almost always they're worth triggering, so get those grab sequences. The final phase of the Corpius fight builds upon the first 2 using all the gimmicks you've already learned, but it also has an extra powerful acid attack added to the mix that you will have to avoid by attaching to the walls of the arena. You may need to dodge a tail attack to the wall if you stay up there too long though, so be careful. Eventually, do enough damage, and Corpius goes down in a glorious cutscene where Samus effortlessly fires a charge shot, flipping through the boss's tail to land full-on superhero pose as the creature is crushed by the Chozo statue. It's so good. I mean, what else can you ask for from a Metroid boss fight? What, the ability to kill a boss via a clever sequence break that the developers thought of? Well boy, do I have news for you in like 20-30 minutes. But first, let's take our prize, the Phantom Cloak, and use it to get past all those pesky sensor-based doors and make our way to the rightmost side of the zone so we can take an elevator up to a brand new location. And can I just quickly praise these loading screens? While the frame rate on them is slightly choppy, the actual visual of Samus just standing there, breathing, immerses us in the world. It's like we're actually in the elevator waiting for our stop, and this isn't the only time we see these type of loading screens in the game. They're all fantastic. Great presentation all around. But it's time to arrive in Compared to the damp, cold caverns of Artaria, Cataris is this game's resident volcanic level, taking inspiration from classic locations like Norfair or Sector 3. Only this area revolves less around volcanic caverns and more around a mechanical mining thermal operation. The entire planet is powered by the magma that is processed through this station, something that will come into play multiple times throughout the game. You'll be blasting through walls, taking on machinery and avoiding flamethrowers, while using magnetic rails and rerouting magma flow to progress. You also get a briefing on your Phantom Cloak from Adam, who reveals you can use it to bypass the echolocation systems of EMI units, though at the cost of your mobility. The Ion Bar is also back from Samus Returns, and while using the Phantom Cloak, it will begin to deplete. Your Phantom Cloak ability will remain active if the bar hits 0, but it will then start draining your health instead. It can't kill you though, it will leave you at 1 HP. For me, I never felt the need to overclock this ability until the 4th or 5th EMI zones further into the game, where the layouts of each area become more complex. As long as you keep track of your Aeon gauge while using the cloak, you'll be fine. You use more of the gauge when you're moving around while cloaked, so keep that in mind, and when you uncloak, you need to move at least once before the gauge starts refilling. It does help that the gauge will refill automatically, which I've heard was not the case in Samus Returns. I don't want to imagine having to farm enemies for ion pickups, that would be hell. Now, Cataris' main puzzle that you'll be facing involves redirecting the magma flow to access different doors and areas. There's a lot of backtracking, moving through the same rooms and the EMI zone, and you'll have to be on the lookout for more hazards. You can't enter hot rooms, as Samus can't withstand the temperature, so you'll need to find ways to drain lava or deheat rooms to progress. The enemies get a little tougher as well. You've got these mechanical droids, rock monsters that shoot explosive flames, and the award for the most annoying enemy type in the game, these little wall crawlers that spit out random projectiles. They're more durable than you might think, and they were the bane of my existence on Dread mode. Kill them as quickly as you can, lest they ruin your day as well. Now, you won't spend too much time in Cataris beyond finding a path forwards, as the item you need to actually access the central unit of this area is in the next zone, Diaron. Though you will pass this room that reminds me heavily of the entrance to Ridley's lair in Super Metroid. Don't worry though, for the first time in forever, Ridley isn't in the game. If you've done everything correctly, you'll eventually find your first shuttle, which will take you to the third major area, Diaron, which we'll be visiting briefly for now, and acts as a main hub for the various areas of the game. It doesn't contain its own area boss technically, but has connections between each of the game's major zones through elevators, shuttles, and teleporters. The main gimmick of Diaron is it is lacking power. You have to explore the facility, restoring power as you go. For your first visit, you'll only enter the first portion of Diaron, obtaining the wide beam, which allows you to push back wide beam blocks and open wide beam doors. But you'll also encounter the third EMI unit, the yellow EMI, equipped with the speed booster. The first two EMIs are nothing compared to the speed of this unit, able to chase Samus at top speeds. You never want to be on a straight path with it unless you've got the Omega Blaster, because it will spark up and catch you without giving you a chance to breathe. Diaron also contains new mechanical enemy types, including these sharp blades that run along the floor, and these flying creatures that shoot attacks in the cardinal directions. Be sure to take your time when going through these rooms, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and defeated by these enemies. Trust me, I know. But if you get the wide beam, you can make your way back to Cataris to defeat the green EMI once and for all. As you progress though, you'll start to realize that defeating the EMIs once you've obtained the Omega Blaster gets tougher than it seems. You'll always be contained in specific rooms once the power-up is gained, and it's almost a puzzle figuring out which area gives you enough distance to melt the EMI's faceplate so you can deliver that finishing blow. But with the green EMI defeated, you can finally gain access to the Morph Ball. And it's here where the game really begins to open up. With the Morph Ball, you have access to all those one-block gaps you've been unable to fit through this whole time. You could go back to Artaria, you can explore Cataris, or you can head to Diaron, and there are a ton of places you can go now. Before the game allows you free roam of the map for a while first, though, you will need to collect one more major power-up. The Varia suit, which allows Samus to withstand the hot temperatures that have blocked our access to certain rooms. And it's here where you'll most likely notice the game's railroading world design. You see, when the game doesn't know how to organically get you from one side of the map to another, they'll just use teleporters to broach the distance. I'm actually okay with this decision though. There are some teleporters that aren't easily found, but slot perfectly into your route when trying to speedrun the game for those under 4-hour achievements. This teleporter, however, is on the main path and serves as a brief loop that will have you there and back again in no time. And for finding the teleporter, you'll also be rewarded with a new type of missile upgrade, the Missile Plus pickup, which adds 10 whole missiles to your arsenal. Keep this in future games, please. It's a great reward, and you'll often find these on the main path, or within the game's toughest optional challenges for collectibles. And I have to praise the loading screen for the teleporters, because Samus looks like Dark Samus in these scenes. It's so interesting, I love the blue hues, it just works. Fantastic job. The teleporter brings Samus back to Artaria, to an area of the map we've seen before, and heading left, you'll find a Morph Ball passage with an energy part at the end. These act as heart pieces from Zelda. Collect 4 and you'll get a new energy tank, very straightforward. This energy part is also designed to lead you down the intended path, as past it is the portion of the map leading to the Varia suit. You'll have to go through an intense meltdown sequence with flamethrowers, moving debris, and a steadily rising temperature, one of the early highlights of the game for me. It comes out of nowhere, and right at a point in the game where you're starting to feel more confident in Samus's abilities. It's a nice wake-up call that you're still on a dangerous alien planet and anything can go wrong. Now, I was kind of sad when I obtained the Varia suit, because I really liked the blue streaks in the base version of Samus's suit in this game, and this power-up effectively removes those, bringing the suit back to a more traditional color scheme. There was just something stylish and sleek about the base game suit, and neither the Varia nor the later obtained Gravity suit hit those same highs. But with Varia suit in hand, you can wrap around to the red teleporter and maybe collect this missile tank in the lava. You can survive if you have full health, and head back to Cataris. And it's here where the game's most famous sequence break can be performed. You see, normally you're supposed to go through Lower Cataris with the Varia suit until you reach the area's boss. But if you decide to head back to Diaron instead, you can enter this area, break this floor, and head through this door in Lower Diaron. And if you head into this large room here, you can perform a slide jump into a wall jump to enter this Morph Ball tube. Follow it along to the other side of the room and perform another slide jump, and BAM! You've just got into the elevator that takes you directly to the grapple beam power-up early. Normally you'd have to obtain the speed booster before getting this ability, and you'd get it through a route in Artaria, but by taking the elevator from Diaron, you can collect it with ease and save a ton of time in future areas by opening grapple beam shortcuts early. And by obtaining the grapple beam, you can also get the Morph Ball bombs early. Simply head to the left in this room, follow the path until you reach the Emmy zone, and find the exit that takes you to a grapple beam blockage. Make your way through said blockage, and you'll be in the second portion of Diaron, facing a blackout. All you gotta do is restore the power, and you can obtain the Morph Ball bombs like you normally would. Now, this sequence break isn't used in most speedruns because it's quicker to defeat the Cataris boss first before getting the grapple beam. And at that point, the Morph Bombs would be your next canonical item to collect anyway, even if some speedruns don't even bother with the Cataris boss. Kinda badass in that sense. By going out of your way to collect the grapple beam and the Morph Ball bombs before facing the boss of Cataris though, you're setting yourself up for one hell of a developer treat. Flashback to Lower Cataris, you have to move through some volcanic caverns while deadly roars rack the surroundings. But what's causing those roars? Let's find out. This is 100% my favorite Samus moment in the game. Why? Because she tells a story with just a few movements. She lands in the room, nervous and unsure, there's a threat and she has no clue what it could be, but the moment she realizes it's Kraid, she stands up straight and casually blasts him with a charge beam. It's like reacting to your ex. She has dealt with Kraid multiple times at this point, and he's not a threat anymore. In fact, Samus's entire characterization in this game can be summed up with the phrase, "I'm so done with all of this." Kraid's boss fight is a nice homage to his previous appearances in the series. All his staple attacks are here. In his first phase, he alternates between throwing his fingernails at you, which can be destroyed for ammo, and you can actually see them regrow. It's really gross, but it's also kind of perfect. He can also shoot large amounts of projectiles at you from his mouth, which you can break or dodge as needed. To damage him, you need to hit his mouth with either a charge shot or a missile, which will force it open, allowing you to then fire into his mouth to damage him. I find it's easier to hit him during the fingernail attack, as his mouth tilts at a tough angle during the projectile attack, but do enough damage and you will hit phase 2. In this phase, you have to do enough damage to Kraid's, belly button, question mark? To get him to fire his trademark spiked platforms, which allow you to reach a magnetized wall at face level. From here, blast away at his face while avoiding more fingernails and claw swipes, one of which is counterable. If you fall down, you'll have to avoid breakable projectiles and poison attacks while re-damaging his belly button. Now, Kraid was hard for me. It took a while for me to get used to everything that was going on, but on subsequent playthroughs I find myself taking more risky plays that pay off in regards to this fight. As long as you get a grab sequence or two while you're up on the magnetized wall, you've basically won. But if you decided to do the sequence break like I explained earlier to get the Morph Ball bombs, at the start of the second phase, you can Morph Bomb the bottom left wall to reveal a special cannon. Activate it and you'll be launched right into Kraid's stomach, where you can bomb him to death for an instant kill from the inside. What a reference to Metroid 2, am I right? Note that you will take damage during this method though, so be sure to have enough energy to finish Kraid off. The fact the developers knew you could get the Morph Bombs early and planted this as a little Easter egg for those sequence breakers and speedrunners, it shows a level of dedication to the franchise, and proves that this game really isn't as linear as you think. Of course, speedrunners don't use this method because it's quicker to get the grapple beam skip after beating Kraid, as once you defeat him, you obtain the diffusion beam, and there's a teleporter that takes you straight to where the grapple beam skip is located. But it's the thought that counts. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I beat Kraid and we got the cutscene of him sinking into the lava, I was expecting another phase to the fight. I genuinely thought, oh, Kraid's gonna show up again because that felt too simple, but I think that's the point. This is Samus's third time against Kraid in the canon, following her Zero mission and Super Metroid encounters. So, third time's the charm. She's finished him off before, she's done it again, she don't need to worry. Defeating Kraid, collecting the diffusion beam, and finding the teleporter takes you back to Diaron, where, if you're following the main path, you'll head through the next Emmy zone, restore power to the second half of the level, and obtain the Morph Ball bombs if you haven't already. From there, we head west, passing a room with a rather ominous looking creature being experimented upon. I'm sure that's not an important detail or anything. We take some Morph Ball tracks until we reach an aquatic cavern, and that links us to our next shuttle. This takes us to Burenia, the water level of the game. The upper half of Burenia is a research facility, and I love the stormy weather and choppy seas as you arrive. It feels like you're in the middle of a hurricane, providing a unique atmosphere compared to the places we've been before. For a while, I actually thought we'd made it above ground somehow, but it's confirmed that all the environments on planet ZDR take place underground, so there's just this stormy ocean climate under the surface, and that's really cool to me. Burenia is also unique in that it's the only large-scale explorable area in the game without an Emmy zone. I suspect this was because the gravity suit, which allows free movement underwater, doesn't get obtained until the late game, and the slow movement speed of Samus underwater isn't very fun in long bursts. It doesn't lend itself mechanically to the high-intense chase sequences in the prior Emmy sections, and you also won't be exploring all of Burenia on your first go-around either. The upper half of the map is completely blocked off, and you can only explore so far underwater before you're unable to progress further. Progression is fairly simple. Drop down to the bottom of the underwater room and platform your way to the right side. But if you did the grapple beam skip, you can avoid multiple portions of this level entirely, removing grapple beam blockages to save time. Climb back up and you'll get access to one of the most useful abilities in the game, the Flash Shift. This ability allows Samus to warp left or right through the air up to 3 times, using the Ion Meter, and it replenishes very quickly, allowing for ease of movement when it comes to some of the later boss fights and mini-bosses the game has in store. You can also use this ability to pass by pressure-sensitive doors, though be aware that it doesn't give you invincibility frames when you use it. If you flash shift into an enemy, you will still take damage. It can also be an effective speedrunning movement tool for getting across gaps, moving through horizontal rooms quickly, etc, etc. It can't be used underwater though until you've retrieved the gravity suit in the late game. I think this ability needs to become a mainstay of Samus's arsenal, honestly, as it gives the developers a lot of leeway to create tougher enemies in the future, knowing you can use an ability like Flash Shift to avoid attacks. With your newfound ability, you can pick up a nearby energy tank, and open up a shortcut back to the shuttle you used to get to Burenia. But you actually want to open this lower path and take this lower shuttle back to Diaron, giving you access to the Diaron Emmy's central unit. This is one of those routes that you might actually miss if you're not careful. I know it slipped my mind during one of my playthroughs and I was like, where do I go? Once you get back to Diaron though, it's basically a straight shot to the next Emmy zone, where you'll need to navigate your way to the next central unit. I struggled here a lot, both because the layout in this area is very confusing, but also because the yellow Emmy is just fast, and once it's seen you, it's almost impossible to escape without needing to counter it. This also applies to defeating the Emmy, as while looking for corridors that would allow me to melt off its faceplate, the Emmy would often jitter forwards at a pace much faster than I could handle, leading to a lot of retreating on my part. Of the Emmy battles, the yellow Emmy definitely was the most nerve-wracking on my first playthrough, coming down to the wire. But once it goes down, you gain access to the speed booster, shine sparking, and all the fun movement tools that go along with it. In my first playthrough, I didn't do many crazy Shine Spark or Speed Booster tricks, as I really wasn't aware just how much you can carry your speed's momentum through wall jumps and slides. But on repeat playthroughs, I found myself zipping and speeding through the environment without a care in the world. Just the fact the speed booster is toggled via clicking the left stick is a fantastic decision that gives players so much more power over the ability. Shine sparking is also easier, with you being able to select a specific direction after triggering the Shine Spark animation. And of course, as is tradition with Metroid games, the Shine Spark ability will be very useful in tons of sequence breaks, including early Gravity Suit. Now, if you've been paying attention, there are a ton of speed booster blocks to destroy in Diaron's Emmy Zone, and eventually you'll find your way to the top of the area, breaking open a wall to reveal a new elevator. Except it's locked behind a grapple beam block. That's right, if you didn't do the grapple beam skip, now is the correct time to obtain that power-up. And all you have to do is return to the starting room of Diaron, shine spark up to this missile tank, drop down and take the teleporter right back to Artaria. This will drop you inside the Emmy Zone of Artaria, right by a speed boost barrier, which ultimately will lead you up to the grapple beam. From there, you just take the elevator I mentioned earlier, and you'll find your way back to Diaron in no time. With that, you can access that elevator at the top of Diaron, which takes you to Ferenia, the Chozo Sanctuary. And it's here, after a brief gameplay segment, that we find ourselves getting actual exposition on Planet ZDR, Ravenbeak, and the Chozo. This is the first of 2 major turning points in the game, and really sets the stakes for the next portion of Samus's adventure. After entering an Emmy zone, we're greeted with a cutscene that displays what I love about Samus's characterization more than any other scene. We always see Samus as this badass, taking names and no nonsense, so when she sees the Chozo mural and that curiosity, followed by intense rage at Ravenbeak overtakes her, it feels genuine and real. The way she can barely react when the Emmy blasts through the wall, or the pose she adopts when she can finally relax for a moment. Mercury's team have perfectly nailed Samus's character, and it's here where we are also filled on the game's main plot. And while this cutscene definitely runs a tad longer than I would have liked, the exposition is needed, and getting to hear voiced Chozo dialect is a nice treat. Quiet Robe, a Chozo who saves Samus, is the last member of the scientific Thoha tribe, the rest slaughtered by Ravenbeak and the warrior Morkin tribe, who wanted to use the Metroids to conquer the galaxy yada yada yada. The two tribes were initially aligned, trapping the Metroids on planet SR-388 from Metroid 2, but when the Thoha expressed their desire to destroy both the Metroids and the X-Parasites, well, Ravenbeak was, as the kids would say, upsetty spaghetti. Quiet Robe was spared, as he's able to control the Metroids with his Thoha DNA, but upon returning to planet ZDR, well, everything went to hell when one of the Morkin soldiers turned out to be an X-Parasite in disguise. Cue a pandemic that cost Ravenbeak's entire tribe their lives, something that we totally can't relate to at all in our current day and age, am I right? But with Samus now on planet ZDR, implanted with Metroid DNA following the events of Fusion, she is being targeted so that Ravenbeak can revive the Metroids and continue his conquest. And it's here, for the first time in 2D Metroid history, we hear a fully voiced Samus speak in her Chozo language, and I guarantee if you're a Metroid fan, you were flipping out when she spoke. Succinct, concise, to the point. This woman can do no wrong. Quiet Robe then opens up a new path to Upper Burenia, giving us our next location to explore. This moment just hit me in a way that I don't think any other moment in the series has. Even when she spoke in Fusion, it wasn't voiced, so it didn't necessarily have as much effect. This just, amazing, perfect, I love it. However, in a shocking twist, Quiet Robe is suddenly assassinated by a robotic Chozo soldier, something I didn't even see coming, and I kind of wish Samus had more of a reaction than she did. This man was a Chozo, the race that raised her. She hasn't seen a living Chozo for a long time, and when he's killed, you can see anger in her expression, but that's it. Even a little shout could have been satisfying, we just heard her speak. But there's no time to mourn because we are thrust into an extremely tough mini-boss battle, at least for your first playthrough. The robotic Chozo soldiers have 3 different blaster attacks and 2 different melee attacks, and they come out very fast. I can tell you I died a lot my first time against this guy, and that's because it does so much damage, and I still wasn't used to the controls, using the flash shift in battle to avoid certain attacks, etc, etc. The blaster attacks are mostly fine to dodge, they're easily predictable, and if you keep your distance you'll have no issues. The problem comes from those melee attacks. They're fast, often requiring near-instant reaction times to counter or avoid. If the melee attack is blue, you can counter it, but if it's red, get out of there! The unblockable melee attack has different speeds at which it can be launched as well, adding an extra layer of prediction to the affair, and the only way to avoid it really is to flash shift behind the robot or escape to a different elevation. It'll take all of your missiles to bring this robot down, and they only get tougher with each reappearance during the campaign, so you should use this battle as a form of practice. I will say, I wish there was an option to reload Samus into the battle itself when you die. Having to reinitiate the exposition cutscene and skip it got a little annoying after a while. But there's nothing more satisfying than learning the tells and taking down your opponent. I often wondered how you were supposed to dodge certain attacks during my first playthrough of Dread, but looking back at my old footage has me screaming at the screen, "Do this! Do that! It's easy, you idiot!" I love that Metroid Dread is a game that can be learned, and understanding and executing the mechanics really rewards you on repeat playthroughs. With the robot defeated, Samus spares a moment to send off Quiet Robe, before making her way through a few Ferenian rooms to a secondary elevator leading back to Diaron. And from here, it's a trek back to Burenia, which can be brutal on hard and Dread mode playthroughs, as there's a lot of ground to cover from where you start in Diaron to the shuttle. And there are a lot of enemies scattered about looking to make life difficult as well. But as this is all ground we've covered before, it shouldn't take too long to make the journey, and once in Burenia, you can use your speed booster to acquire a new energy part which you couldn't reach before. This is also a good time to mention the enemies of Burenia. I didn't touch upon them earlier. The enemies that stick to the wall and suck you in are kind of annoying. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think you're supposed to morph bomb them and they're supposed to swallow the bomb and explode, but most of the time it just felt very awkward fighting them. The giant enemies that spew either acid or a ton of babies can be countered very quickly if you're fast enough, and I kind of like that that's a thing you can do with them. The wall enemies that shoot lasers up and down the rooms, they're fun. They remind me a bit of Mega Man enemies, but they're nothing special. I don't know, I just find the enemies in this area to be a little bit tedious, and maybe that's just a side effect of being a water level. I don't know. Upper Burenia isn't a large area, not by any means, but it is quite the enemy gauntlet. I wasn't that attuned to using the counter against regular enemies in my first playthrough, so I spent this section carefully timing shots instead, and it got quite tedious. Still, the Upper Burenia background visuals more than make up for my slow pace. I mentioned before how I just love the vibe of this area. Also, nice little detail with the stairs in the background in certain areas for regular people. There's something comedic about the fact Samus ignores the very obvious stairs because of the 2D gameplay. And I love how on the western side of the level, you can actually see tentacles wrapping around the environment, cluing you into your next encounter just a few rooms later. See, it's a 2D Metroid game, and ever since Super Metroid gave us the underwater Meridia Zone, water bosses have become a thing in the franchise. And Dread has Drogaiga. Probably my least favorite boss in the game, though only because it feels less focused on the action compared to the rest of the roster, and revolves around Samus's slow underwater movement. You have to fire at the large tentacle on the ceiling, avoiding other tentacle swipes and colored projectiles. You can destroy the blue flames, but not the red flames. Let's not figure out the science behind flames being underwater in the first place. My head hurts from writing the script as it is. Your goal is to do enough damage so the tentacle in the center retracts, activating the buttons on either side of the room, as well as the automated grapple point on the ceiling. The buttons on either side of the room will lower the water level, allowing you to attack the boss's core, and you can use the aforementioned grapple point to safely cross over the boss to get to the second button. It's incredibly formulaic, and doesn't quite live up to the excitement of Kraid or Corpius. It's a puzzle boss. The attacks get a little dicier after you do some damage, but overall it's a bit of a slog. And you don't even get a power-up for beating it, it's purely blocking your path to the next area. The grab sequence isn't even anything interesting. It's a shame. But what if I told you then, that you don't even have to fight Drogaiga? See the shortcut I just opened? What if I told you it was possible to open it from the other side? Well, in Metroid Dread, there is a speedrun tech called a DT slide, which allows you to fire your blast through walls during your slide animation. Now, it's difficult because you're essentially taking advantage of Samus's blaster being slightly out of bounds, and it also requires precise aiming. But if you can master this skip, you never have to deal with the water boss ever again. There are multiple different videos with multiple different methods for performing a Drogaiga skip, but this tutorial by Morgan Must Die is the method I ultimately used, and you can see me performing the skip on screen. It's really satisfying to pull off, and this isn't the only place in the game where DT sliding can skip sequences. Flashback to the start of the game, you can actually skip the tutorial Emmy sequence with a few well-timed slide jumps, releasing your fire button at the right time to trigger the collapsing wall while on the other side. It saves a minute or two, and it's satisfying to pull off even if you're missing out on those 2 missiles. Back to Burenia though, however you choose to progress, you'll make your way up this shaft to an elevator leading to your next major zone. I was pleasantly surprised my first time arriving in Ghavoran because I really wasn't expecting an underground jungle flush with flora and fauna under the surface of ZDR. And often the jungle areas tend to appear earlier in games, whereas we're over halfway through the experience at this point. And you'll be coming through this area a lot, as it acts as a hub for the late game areas of ZDR. Once you enter Ghavoran for the first time though, and pull this grapple block, you'll be hit by one of those pesky points of no return. There's no way back to the elevator from this side, forcing you to continue onwards into the unknown. Now, on the plus side, the Emmys are currently inactive, so any Emmy zones you pass won't give you any hassle, thank you Quiet Robe, but you will still need to contend with a host of new enemy types. These spider-looking creatures gave me quite the fright my first time through, as their movements really trigger my arachnophobia. Luckily, you can counter them pretty easily if you notice their tail. You'll also have to fight another Chozo robot mini-boss. It's the same fight as the previous one, just in a different arena. Honestly, of all the fights in the game, this one felt the most like padding. It does give a sense that Ghavoran as an area is a little more dangerous than prior zones, but if you're going to reuse mini-bosses, at least shake up their moveset slightly. I will say, on Dread mode though, this boss was harder than the previous, as if you get cornered on one of the lower levels, you'll have a harder time avoiding its attacks. My go-to method of dealing with this robot is to flash shift from one side of the room to the other via the top levels, since there's a lot of straight ground that makes pumping the Chozo with missiles much easier. Once you eventually beat the robot, Ghavoran may seem like a daunting zone to explore, but for this first visit, you're pretty much guided through the rooms without much deviation. This is because, following Ghavoran, we'll reach a portion of the game that changes up the game world for the rest of the playthrough. It has to happen now. You'll quickly also find your first missile power-up, the Super Missiles, allowing you to blow open green missile hatches and access new areas. You'll end up wrapping back around to the starting room of Ghavoran and opening the super missile door there, which will take you on a one-way trip through a room filled with spider enemies and a flying whale, to a shuttle, leading to the smallest area in the game, but one that makes a big impact. Elan is the home of the Morkan tribe, the warrior Chozos, and Ravenbeak's abandoned abode, and when you enter, it's eerily silent. The doors open wide, allowing you passage, but once inside, they shut behind Samus, locking us inside. And it's here where I was wondering just where the game was going next. I thought this would be where we next encounter Ravenbeak, but I was completely wrong. Instead, after a bit of exploration, we encounter an old foe and an old mechanic. That's right, the X-Parasites from Fusion are officially back in the game! We heard about the X-Parasite at the beginning of the game, and then we heard they were on ZDR through Quiet Robe, but now we get to see what happened in the interim, and they've completely overtaken Elan. With us being trapped inside, it becomes a challenge of now finding our way out of this facility. The X-Parasites work exactly like they did in Fusion. Once you destroy an enemy, they'll revert to their X-Parasite form, and Samus can absorb them to recover either HP or ammunition or both. Leave them floating around for too long though, and they'll form into a different enemy, forcing you to fight them all over again. The X enemies are far tankier than the regular enemies you've been facing up till now, and require a bit more firepower to take down, assuming you don't go for the insta-kill counters. Shout out to those flamethrower enemies, by the way. They're tanky and can damage you even after you obtain the screw attack later in the game, making them extremely hellish for Dread mode runs. These blob-like enemies, which we've seen every now and then throughout the game, also get a deadly upgrade. Now they're unable to be countered when they launch at you, and whatever surface they land on, they'll discharge electricity onto. These guys are best avoided if you can help it. Elan is also home to our next beam upgrade, the Plasma Beam, allowing us to open green plasma doors and make our escape from the zone. But not before we face a new mini-boss, the Chozo Soldier. This is the reanimated corpse of a fallen Morkan Chozo, and they act as a recurring mini-boss encounter for the late game. In its first phase, the warrior will either try to spear you with a thrusting attack, or it'll retreat to one of the walls so it can do a plunging attack on your location. The attacks are very clearly telegraphed, and I found these enemies to be far easier to deal with than the Robot Chozo Soldier mini-bosses. Liberal use of the flash shifts should see you through these fights, even when the Chozo warrior hits phase 2 and its jaw and body contorts due to the X-Parasite controlling it. Genuinely horrifying imagery, and the battle does change up slightly. Its thrust attacks will cover more distance than in phase 1, while during its plunging attack it will always target the center of the arena, sending goopy shockwaves outwards that can hit Samus if you're not careful. Still, take things nice and slow, and you'll get the moveset of these guys down without too much trouble. They remind me of the Mantis Lords from Hollow Knight if I had to make a comparison, and that's a very good comparison to make. To finish the boss off, you will need to complete 2 successful counters during a cutscene, ending with Samus casually dislocating the boss's jaw, plus a charge shot for good measure. It's a level of brutality that I would expect in something like Mortal Kombat, not Metroid, but you love to see it. Once defeated though, you're free to explore the vents of Elan or head out. I'd recommend waiting until the endgame to come back and explore. Some items can't be obtained just yet, but once you head out, a cutscene plays, and while we can't see Samus's face here, you just know she's got that "oh for fuck's sake" expression. How else would you feel when you realize you've let the X-Parasites escape captivity so they can infect the entire planet? That's right, every enemy on the planet is now infected with the X, meaning harder enemies overall, and perhaps more unforeseen consequences yet to come. But worst of all, on the trip back to Ghavoran, we see an X-Parasite infect and reanimate Quiet Robe's body, allowing him to reactivate the remaining Emmys in Ghavoran and Ferenia. What's not clear is whether this is Ravenbeak's doing or not, as he shouldn't have control over the X. So in that sense, Quiet Robe's motives here remain an unknown. With Plasma Beam in hand, another part of Ghavoran is open to you, though you will have to endure an Emmy zone first, and this is the first Emmy that you have no information about. Its power is an unknown to you. You'll be backtracking through the same zone, using different entrances to reach higher levels, and you may just find yourself literally frozen in fear if the light blue enemy gets too close to you. Stealth is very important here, though luckily each run through Ghavoran's Emmy zone is fairly small, and you get automated checkpoints each time you enter the zone from a new entrance, so you're always making progress. You've faced enough Emmys at this point to know how to handle them. I will say though, I love how Ghavoran's Emmy zone feels more baked into the level design. You really do have to traverse back and forth through the Emmy zone to reach either the western or eastern sides of the region, and it feels like a genuine obstacle that needs to be traversed. That being said, Ghavoran is also home to my least favorite room in the game, and it's this large vertical cavern with fiery blockages and plant-based retractable platforms. I just find the combination of enemies and platforming to be a bit overwhelming and tedious, especially on the return trip, though I'll cover that in a minute or two. Getting further into the region, you'll come across this room in your morph ball, and this is an important location, as it contains 3 different paths you'll be taking to progress the game. It effectively acts as a crossroads. For now, hop into the water and take the lowest path, it's the only one you have access to for now, and you'll find yourself obtaining the spin boost, a double jump above land and a way to increase the distance of your jump underwater. You'll remember that on the western side of Ghavoran, you passed a room where this power-up could be useful, so it's time for a return trip. But first, another ex-Chozo warrior wants to fight, and I don't understand why this fight is here. Future Chozo warrior battles add an extra move to the fight, for example, but this one is the exact same fight as in Elan, and that didn't happen too long ago. It feels like this could have been cut from the game and nothing of value would be lost, especially since this room was already home to a rather large enemy type when first coming through. It just feels like excess padding. But then we get back to my favorite room in the game, and you have to use the double jump on the retractable platforms to make your way back up. Combine this with the extremely fast bug enemies, which I totally should have just counted on my first playthrough, and me still struggling a bit with the grapple controls, and yeah, there was a lot of messy gameplay on my part. Though a valid complaint I have is that once you reach the platform with the 2 fiery plants, I wanted to align Samus carefully so that I could do the next few jumps, but there's no way to make Samus walk slowly forwards. She either does a big step or she doesn't move, and that always made me run into this plant and take damage, fall back down, etc, etc. I wish there was a way for Samus to slowly walk without having to use the Phantom Cloak, like just a slow walk speed. It's not hard. But I digress. I eventually made it through the room, and on repeat playthroughs I have since figured out how to traverse this room without much issue, thank god. Returning through the Emmy Zone to Western Ghavoran, you'll use the spin boost to make it to the uppermost reaches of Ghavoran's Emmy Zone, probably my favourite Emmy Zone of the bunch, where the central unit awaits. Now, the central unit fights in this game are fairly easy, often with the difficulty being determined by the pace of the projectiles being launched at Samus. For some reason though, this central unit gave me a lot of trouble during my Dread mode playthrough. There was just something about the positioning of the turrets in the room that made them a little harder to dodge to me. I don't have Dread mode footage, but believe me when I say this unit is a little tougher than the others. Defeating the light blue Emmy though is much easier, as all you have to do is use this grapple conveyor belt, chill on the top of this platform, and wait for the Emmy to crawl across the ceiling. Quick, easy, bish bash bosh. Don't do what I first tried to do though, which was try and beat the Emmy on the uneven lower levels of the room. Bad idea. But with the Emmy defeated, we gain the ice missiles, allowing Samus to break through those fiery plant obstacles, opening up more of the world. Now, on the progression path, be sure to double jump up this slope to reach a power bomb upgrade, though the game won't tell you that's what it's for since you won't obtain the ability until the end of the game, but it's worth collecting since you can abuse the double jump to reach the collectible early. You'll also find the Pulse Radar Aeon ability, which when used will highlight any breakable blocks in the environment. This is actually a complaint I had with the older Metroid games, where it felt there was no way to discern breakable walls from the rest. It made secret hunting almost a god dang it situation in some cases. So having the Pulse Radar is very useful, and makes the tedium of 100%ing a Metroid game, well, not tedious. Combined with the map flash mechanic that lets you know a secret is in a specific area of the world, and this game is the easiest in the series to 100% complete. Not complaining though, I love it. With the radar obtained, we end up wrapping back around to the Crossroads room in Eastern Ghavoran where we obtained the spin boost, and it's here where you can actually choose to diverge your playthrough. What you're supposed to do is Morph Ball to the right, destroy these fire plants, and take a shuttle to Ferenia to get the Storm Missile and Space Jump power-ups. You need the Space Jump in order to access this ledge here, which will get you to a green teleporter that takes you to Burenia to get the gravity suit. But, if you want, you can get the gravity suit early before getting the Space Jump, which would also lead to early Screw Attack, which is always a good time. It's a big sequence break, and here's how you do it. Start in this room, open the door, and speed boost to the left. Store your speed the moment you get the chance, drop down this gap, and jump into the air above the water. Then trigger the Shine Spark to boost your way up to the normally inaccessible ledge. Boom! You get to the green teleporter, which takes you to Burenia early, and you'll be able to get the gravity suit. The path to the early gravity suit once you arrive though requires a bit more explanation, and I'll cover exactly what to do there later in the video when we get to this teleporter via the developer's intended route. So, let's head to Ferenia. Sticking to the developer intended path, it's time to return to Ferenia from a new entrance. And now we're able to explore the entire zone instead of being trapped in the lower right. We can also complete a tricky Shine Spark puzzle when we arrive with the right movement, which feels amazing to pull off like so. And we already know about the Emmy here in Ferenia, as we know it can see and fire through walls based on our encounter with it earlier in the game. Of the main Emmys, it's the most dangerous to encounter during normal gameplay, as it can shoot you and see you through the walls. Now, it doesn't help Samus that in order to progress through Upper Ferenia, she's going to need to practically run a gauntlet through the Emmy zone, breaking down destructible walls, and hoping we don't get chased as there's a lot of slow underwater segments. It's why getting the gravity suit and finishing that whole plotline early makes Ferenia much easier to visit in the late game, since you can move through the water like a normal person. But here, underwater stealth becomes top priority, and it's the most high-stakes Emmy zone in the game. The tension is perfect, I love it, it feels like what Burenia's Emmy zone could have been, and when you escape, it's like releasing a very deep breath. Eastermost Ferenia is where you'll find your next upgrade, the Storm Missiles, but to obtain them you have to defeat Eskew, a mutated X-Parasite based on the flying insect enemies you've been facing throughout the game. This fight is tough, as Eskew uses a lot of projectile-based attacks, with the attack where it launches multiple small purple shots around the room being the trickiest to avoid. I totally could have used Flash Shift to avoid certain attacks looking back at my footage, but it doesn't matter to me, as if you do the early gravity suit skip I'll explain later, you can get the screw attack early and practically destroy this boss when you encounter it. It's weak to the screw attack, and the ability nullifies all of its projectiles. It's why, on a Dread mode playthrough, I recommend getting the screw attack as early as you can, so you don't have to do this boss under normal circumstances. And I practically bounced in my chair when this boss turned into one of the X-Cores from Metroid Fusion, and you had to take it down in the exact same fashion. It was a great callback and made a lot of Metroid fans, myself included, very happy. And finally, after beating the boss, we absorb the X and get the Storm Missiles, this game's Seeker Missile, and they work like a dream. Holding down the R button changes your laser sight to yellow, allowing you to lock onto targets or buttons by aiming the sight around. Press Y once locked onto your targets and spray away. I found the Storm Missile to be extremely useful against certain enemies and mini-bosses, since the burst damage is so high, but you have to ensure you've got enough missiles to actually use the ability. Each target consumes 3 missiles, and you can target up to 5 objects, making 15 missiles, so you'll need to get used to countering to get that ammo back. Storm Missiles are used to open these stone doors marked by green circles, target their buttons, and the block vanishes, allowing safe passage. And back near the shuttle you used to enter Ferenia is one of those doors leading to the next power-up, the space jump. So that's the next destination. Though once we make it back to this large central room, we'll find ourselves ambushed by not 1, but 2 robot Chozo soldiers. I did not see this one coming, and it was a big difficulty spike for me. As I mentioned previously, I found these enemies quite tricky to fight and avoid solo, so 2 of them was like walking into literal hell, very Ornstein and Smo. Luckily, this fight also taught me about using my Storm Missiles on mini-bosses, and I learned that the Storm Missile damage will eat these guys' health bars for absolute breakfast. Target 1, lock on, fire, and do some work. Dread mode is a bit tougher since you're having to avoid every attack, and sometimes it can be difficult with the terrain and the levels of the arena, but if you made it this far into the game, you are completely capable of taking these guys on. Defeating them, we can head back to the space jump, which can be obtained by Storm Missiling this door. Now, there is also a speedrun skip dedicated to getting the space jump without needing the storm missile, and you can perform this skip the moment you reach Ferenia. Use a strong melee dash right as you hit the wall in this room, and hold down the free aim button when you land. Samus will be slightly clipped into the wall, and you need to aim for the creature down below on the bottom right. If you fire at the right time and the shot is successful, it will go through the wall, hit the creature, and the burst damage will hopefully hit the explosive. This trick is incredibly difficult to pull off, and requires a lot of practice to even remotely get results, but early space jump is certainly worth it. And for beginners out there like myself who want to try some fun speedrunning for the game, there's actually a second exit from this room that you can take instead of heading back to Ghavoran. You'll need to freeze this enemy on the left wall, quickly morph bomb the wall above it, and hop into the gap that appears before you fall. Very risky, as if you accidentally kill the enemy, you have to leave and re-enter the room. This will set you on a path back to the elevator to Diaron, which leads into going for an early screw attack, which normally you get after the gravity suit. It's one of the biggest sequence breaks in the game for new speedrunners, and if you want to know more about these speedrun strategies, check out this video by Devalor. He explains a basic speedrunning route way better than I could, and it should get you set up to speed if you really want to attempt to speedrun yourselves. I'd also recommend Carter Freak's Any% speedrun of the 1.0.2 version of this game. It skips a ton of bosses, showcases some pretty interesting glitches I didn't know existed, and the general vibes of the run are fantastic. His channel has quite a few Metroid Dread speedruns for more recent versions as well, including a Dread mode run. It's just really good content, and I'd rather let the professional speedrunners tell you how it all works over me, who has no clue about any of this beyond basic skips. Anyway, with the space jump obtained, we can use it to head back to Ghavoran and up to the ledge leading to the green teleporter to Burenia. The intended path is to head left, down, and use the space jump to access a new door in lower Burenia. This will ultimately wrap you around the lower left side of the complex, with your goal being to reach the lower east side of the underwater zone. It's here where, after some tricky platforming and a few explosives, you'll find the gravity suit. The lower left portion of Burenia does contain some good upgrades for you if you take that path. There's a Missile Plus tank just to the west of the green teleporter in that first large underwater room, and further along there's an energy tank waiting for the pickings behind a storm missile blockade. You'll have to use the space jump to get to platforms across the room, marked by these lights in the background. It's honestly quite a fun section that has you making your way down until you hit the seafloor, and I was honestly convinced we'd be fighting another water boss down here. This room just screamed boss arena, but it's just one of those squids from Ghavoran. Instead, it just connects to the lower right portion of the level, and thus where you find the gravity suit. However, if you're capable of shine sparking, you can skip the entire lower west portion of Burenia, and here is how to do it. From the green teleporter, bomb the lower right wall until you drop into a lower chamber. Head through the door on the right and speed boost to the left. Do this correctly and you'll break the floor. Then head back and activate your speed boost again, but this time hold a charge. Run through the door to the bottom right, slide through this hole, blast through the floor, and shine spark in the direction of this ramp to your left. If you did this correctly, Samus will start running up the ramp, and when you hit the top, crouch to save another speed boosted charge. Make your way through the next hallway until the next drop, and then shine spark to the right and up the next ramp. Hit the top and crouch again to save another speed booster charge, and drop down into the next room. From here, all you have to do is shine spark to the right, and you'll find a Missile Plus tank. This is a late game shine spark puzzle, but if you then bomb the right wall, you'll find yourself in the eastern side of Burenia. Simply do a hop up onto this ledge, climb up to this vantage point, blow up the rubble, and you'll gain access to the gravity suit. Boom! Now, if you have the space jump, you can simply space jump upwards in this room until you reach the corridor heading right, and that'll take us to an elevator leading back to Artaria. If you don't have the space jump, you will need to shine spark up there, building momentum by running through the corridor where you obtain the gravity suit. Either way, you'll be heading down the elevator to Artaria, where you'll find everything is a little bit frosty. The heating system over in Cataris has stopped functioning, and as a result, the planet's temperature is dropping. And this provides one of my favorite tropes in video games, revisiting old areas that have drastically changed in some way. Think the Forgotten Crossroads from Hollow Knight becoming the Infected Crossroads after you get the Dream Nail as a more recent example. With Artaria having frozen over, the path through to Cataris is a little bit more difficult to navigate through. First, you'll have to explore these new rooms in the west side of the zone, and you will notice a Chozo statue right near the elevator you just came from. That, my friends, is the Screw Attack, and to get it, we'll need to restart the heating system over in Cataris so that we can melt all of this ice so we can access the room. The Screw Attack acts as a reward to the player for solving this little mini-quest, but it won't be as simple as pressing a button to fix things up. There's definitely more to this than meets the eye. Western Artaria is very linear. The game will ferry you down the correct path to progression, and very quickly, you'll find yourself dropping down into another mini-boss against an infected ex-Chozo warrior. Unlike the previous incarnations of this fight, however, this guy does have a new trick. In Phase 1, he starts with a shield. At certain moments, you'll be able to melee counter the shield, smashing it to pieces. I never did this on my first playthrough because, as I've mentioned a few times in the past, I didn't feel fully comfortable with the counter ability until my second or third run-throughs of the game. The rest of the moveset is exactly the same for Phase 1, but in Phase 2, the X form of the boss has a new ability. When it sticks to one of the walls, it can, on top of the move it used before, charge up a beam of black goop, which it will launch very quickly. You can flash shift out of the way with proper timing, and it's not the most difficult attack to avoid, but it comes out very quickly and can catch players off guard during their first encounter. I know it took me a few attempts to get the timing down. He can do this up to 3 times. Do enough damage and you'll get the counter cutscene that finishes the fight, another mini-boss down. Heading to the right takes you to a Shine Spark puzzle room, and on my first playthrough, I had no idea it was there and just ran through after collecting the very obvious energy part, as after going through this room and the next, you'll be back in familiar Artaria territory. But if you want that extra missile plus tank, here is how to solve this particular puzzle in the best way. With that out of the way, don't be like me and not realize where you are. I went to the Chozo statue room where I got my charge beam at the start of the game, and I didn't make the connection as to where I was. A little bit embarrassing on my part. With doors frozen over, the path is leading us back to where our journey began. This portion of the game is quite linear, very reminiscent of the reactor meltdown sequence from Metroid Fusion, as it effectively locks you into completing this portion of the game before you can re-access the rest of the world. But I'm okay with that. Not every part of a Metroidvania needs to be non-linear. Sometimes a well-produced linear sequence can be refreshing, giving you an immediate goal with an interesting setup. Navigating through familiar corridors, realizing that certain paths have been blocked off, forcing you to seek alternate routes, it's a lot of fun. You'll also get a briefing from Adam letting you know that a powerful X may be causing the blockage of thermal energy, and you get an idea of what you're being sent to handle. If you're on the intended path, the space jump will help with navigation, but if you come here after the early gravity suit skip like I tend to do, you may find your path blocked in this room as you need to reach this ledge up here. So you have to find an area to build up some Shine Spark charge so you can get up there using the Shine Spark. Small moments like this make replaying this game so much fun. Eventually you'll navigate to this walkway from earlier in the game, and you can actually see the machinery that's turned off in the background. Here's what it looked like earlier, and here's now. There was a great attention to detail in the backgrounds of this game, and it's still evident even this far in. Reaching the Cataris elevator and heading up to that region, you'll find it's incredibly cold, a complete change from when you were last here, and there's only one route you can take, left and down. Eventually, after heading through rooms we've traversed before, you'll come across a boss door. Head inside, hop into a morph ball track, and it'll take you to my second favorite boss in the game. Experiment number Z57. You actually saw this creature earlier in the game, its corpse being examined in Diaron. But with the X being released, it was revived and ready to cause havoc. Now, the fight itself is a lot of fun. You're in the core of Cataris, this creature is a behemoth compared to what you've been fighting up to this point, and it's aggressive. For its first phase, it uses 2 swipe attacks, swiping left to right and then right to left. You have to jump over the attacks to avoid them. When the second phase hits, after these 2 attacks, it'll also do 2 swipes at the same time, forcing you to jump towards the upper middle portion of the room to avoid them. Its main attack you'll see most often though is its laser blasts. It'll start on one side of the screen and begin to sweep across the floor, stopping for a moment before continuing its onslaught. On the ground though, you'll notice it leaves a residue behind which you need to avoid, except for one safe spot that you can flash shift to or jump to once its laser stops firing for that split second. The timing needs to be quick, or you'll get caught when it fires the second half of its laser sweep. Its third attack in Phase 1 involves Z57 climbing onto one side of the screen and blasting the other half with its laser. In this attack, just get underneath its mouth and be prepared to counter when the laser stops firing for one of the best grab sequences in the game. Samus launches onto Z57's head and they both go for a ride around the Cataris thermal energy cannon. She is not fazed by anything, not even the prospect of falling into the lava below. She's gonna ride this experiment like it's the last ride of her life. She just got the gravity suit, baby! After doing enough damage though, the experiment will stick its arms to the side of the arena, which charges itself with electrical energy, which allows it to target you with a reticle attack that fires if you stand still for too long. Your goal is to damage the arms so that they let go of the walls, and you will get resources if you do this. The toughest attack though is after this, when Z57 decides to activate the fans on the eastern side of the room, forcing you to run against the wind, jumping over energy shockwaves as they attack you. I believe the pattern of the shockwaves is always the same, but it can take a bit of practice to avoid this attack. It's what got me killed the most on my Dread mode playthrough, but avoid this attack, and you will have seen everything Z57 has to offer. Blast the head with missiles until it dies, or do a fun speedrun strat, and during the end of the shockwave attack, try and store a shine spark. If you manage this and aim the shine spark into Z57's head, it's an instant kill. The boss does try to pull a Balrog and take Samus down with it, but Samus isn't no Gandalf the Grey, she's a Gandalf the White, and just barely hangs on for dear life. That ledge doesn't look very grippable though, very smooth, but hey, if Samus can grip that, she's got way better muscles than me. I love this fight from start to finish. It is a spectacle, it is facing Samus off against a creature that absolutely towers over her in size. The attacks are well telegraphed and learnable, no attacks come out too fast to where you can't react, it's just a solid battle. It reminds me almost of a Mega Man Robot Master battle, if that makes any sense. And this is all pretty ironic, because if you're speedrunning the game, this boss fight that is so amazing is optional. Most speedrunning routes go for the screw attack early, often skipping the gravity suit entirely. Using the elevator to go from Burenia to Artaria is, as far as I know, the trigger for the environmental change where everything freezes. So if you just don't activate that trigger, it's completely possible to skip the experiment. Fun stuff. This game is more open than people really thought. But it's now off to get the screw attack, and if you decide to head right after heading back to the Cataris elevator, you'll find yourself able to access these heated rooms, including one that contains a handy teleporter right back to the screw attack in Artaria. But I also like that the game doesn't point this way to the teleporter. Other players may have just headed back down the elevator they used to get here and backtracked the whole way, and that's okay too. There are multiple ways into the screw attack room, and the teleporter is a reward for people who decided to check out those extra rooms in Cataris. The screw attack is your classic Metroid ability. When you activate a spin jump, electricity surrounds your form, and you basically become invulnerable to just about every enemy in the game except those fucking flamethrowers. It's perfect, it's fantastic, it's beautiful, and it allows you to do so many fun things. You do have to make your way back to Ghavoran now though, where those screw attack blocks were, but at this point you can honestly explore the world at your leisure and take whatever route you want to actually get back there. With the space jump, the intended path is to head back to Burenia, head up the water shaft, and then wrap back around to the green teleporter. And I'll be honest, I don't use this route, so I totally forgot there was a fight against another pair of Robot Chozo soldiers up here. Because on future playthroughs, I didn't have the space jump when I got the screw attack, so I couldn't even get up to the fight. My route was to head back to the red teleporter we used way back when to get the Varia suit, and from there I just blow up this floor here, climb up into this heated room, grapple the ceiling, fire a missile here, and boom! Orange teleporter that, yes, takes you right back to Ghavoran, right next to the room you got the pulse radar from, just above the room containing the screw attack blocks. So if you don't want to fight any Chozo robots, that's a secondary route you can take. It's brilliant design, and I found this completely naturally. Now, it's here where you can kind of decide what you want to do next. Technically, you can defeat the Emmy in Ferenia with your current kit, but you can also fight a boss nearby in Ghavoran for a new power-up, as well as an alternative route to Ferenia. On my first playthrough, I was naturally interested in breaking those screw attack blocks in Ghavoran, and this led me to the boss door at the top of the chamber, but on future playthroughs, I would go to Ferenia first. And just so you know, by the way, you don't need the space jump to get up to this boss. You can just use a good shine spark if you want to face this boss early. That being said, this is also the fight I remember the least when I think about Dread's bosses. You drop into a room and face this creature we've tackled before. You beat it and it morphs into another creature we've beaten before. And then you beat it again and it morphs into the actual boss Golzuna. And it's not that difficult. If it starts charging towards you, press yourself against the walls of the room and slide underneath when you get the chance, fire missiles at its backside, and avoid its projectiles as needed. Its projectile attacks do cause burst damage in cardinal directions similar to Bomberman, so you have to keep that in mind. With this four corners attack, you can either space jump in the middle of the projectiles to avoid getting hit, or you can just jump over the boss and stay on the other side of the room. That's a method that works. It's also what you need to do to avoid this diagonal attack, something I didn't quite clock my first playthrough, which led me to tanking a lot of hits against this boss. But it's basically a better enemy with a slightly beefier health pool and moveset. It's nothing particularly special. At least its attacks do clue you in on the power-up you'll obtain after defeating the X-Core it turns into, as you get the cross bombs, which are basically Bomberman bombs. You can use them to boost across breakable blocks and break through blocks quicker because they destroy more blocks. I kinda wish this power-up was used more and given out earlier in the game, but that's just me, because we're gonna be getting the power bombs very soon, and that makes this obsolete. It gets small uses in the next area, but most of the time you can just use normal Morph Ball bombs to make the same progress as long as you're fast enough. It feels like the most afterthought upgrade in the entire game. which is a shame. Hopefully in the next Metroid game, the crossbombs are used to better effect if they return. From here though, you're encouraged to take this shuttle and head to the final main zone of the game, Hanubia, where Samus's ship has been waiting this whole time. Up here, it is raining, storming, and unlike Burenia, this is an above-ground facility. We've made it out of the planet, but you notice there might be a pair of people watching you from afar. We'll get back to them later. Heading inside, I instantly recognized that at some point I would be powerbombing this walkway. It's a classic in the series at this point. Following on, Adam will brief you, letting you know he's still searching for Ravenbeak's location and to return here later. This is basically the game saying you need to finish off the last Emmys before making further progress. This is enhanced as in the next room you'll find a door blocked by a purple shield, and that can only be opened with the power-up from the Ferenia Emmy. What a coincidence then that there's a grapple door here that leads to a room that uses the crossbombs, taking you to an elevator to Ferenia. How convenient. In future playthroughs, I decided to complete Ferenia before getting the crossbombs, as the one area where you need them to progress, which is here, you can use normal morph ball bombs as long as you're quick enough, but perhaps next time I'll remember this little shortcut in the game and actually go the developer intended route, as it probably is quicker in the long run. Heading down the elevator takes us directly to the frozen area of Ferenia, right where we need to be to progress. Crossbomb or morph bomb through this wall, and it's basically a straight path until you reach the next Emmy zone. And from there, this is a race to the central unit. I definitely had a tough time my first run, since there are multiple obstacles you have to break, there's a Seeker missile you have to do, the Emmy can see through walls and shoot through walls. But once you reach the central unit itself, it should be easy peasy. You know how to fight these units at this point, and if you store a Shine Spark and use it on the boss while it's still armored, you will shatter their defenses completely. But more importantly, once the brain is exposed, a single hit with your screw attack will instantly kill it. Bish, bash, bosh. Ding dong. The Ferenia Emmy, I will say, was tough to beat. It's the most uneven area of the Emmy battle arenas, at least until you find this nice straight path on the top of the level. Just make sure you get to the end of this corridor carefully, as there are pressure plates that will close doors in front of you and really screw you over if you're not careful. And if the Emmy does get too close when you're at the end of the corridor, use the grapple point above you to avoid the Emmy before it hits you. And if you do this successfully, that's Emmy number 6 down. Our reward is the Wave Beam, the final upgrade to our beam, able to shoot through walls and destroy purple shield doors. It's the last major upgrade we need to get through every door in the game, and after getting out of the Emmy room, we can wrap around to the Hanubia elevator, and you know where to go next. It's here, as we enter the Hanubia laboratory, that the plot decides to ramp it up a bit, with Samus being attacked by this creature, only to have her hand pick up that strange glow we've seen throughout the game. And she looks pissed. At this point, I still had no idea what was going on here. I feel like other Metroid fans figured it out way in advance, but in hindsight, it does make sense. Samus stops herself from using this power in her hand, putting the creature out of its misery with a blaster, only for us to see Ravenbeak is watching with clear interest. The room next to us is the final Emmy zone, and I was prepared for the toughest challenge yet. But what we got was something more story-focused than I was expecting. Samus steps into this room, and the final Emmy senses her with echolocation. And of course, this Emmy is suited with Samus's power bombs, so one screen nuke later, and Samus is incapacitated. The Emmy approaches, you fall back, the counter sequence begins, and Samus counters perfectly, but I didn't press the button this time. Only Samus gets distracted by her hand glowing again, and it's enough for the Emmy to take her down. But when it goes for the killing blow, her glowing hand begins to siphon the Emmy's energy as she tries to push it back, killing it. And then the music kicks in, and we're all wondering what just happened, but Samus is strangely calm. until we're attacked and forced into another mini-boss fight with another ex-Chozo soldier. This fight is exactly like the last one you fought, same moveset, no differences, but at the end of the fight, instead of blasting the creature with a charge shot, Samus decides to slam its head into the ground and absorb its energy, complete with a badass clenched fist at the end that honestly made me think of Dark Samus. I got the impression that while this was badass as fuck, Samus had just become a very scary person. But hey, absorbing the final Emmy, we regain our power bombs, allowing Samus to explore every nook and cranny of planet ZDR from this point forwards. All power-ups obtained. Power bombs are the screen nukes of Metroid, and they're no different here in Dread. It is a shame then that they're relegated to this endgame collectible that doesn't quite have as much use as they should. They're just a way of keeping certain collectible upgrades unobtainable until the endgame, but because they don't have a lot of uses, it makes the presence of power bomb upgrades, as an example, kind of unneeded. Spoilers, but following this, it's basically just the final boss fight and that's it. You maybe need 4 power bombs at a certain point in the fight. I don't know, I wish they had been introduced earlier, as I wanted to see more uses of the power bomb beyond what we end up using them for in the story, which amounts to blowing up a ceiling, blowing up a bridge, and then blowing up this glass reactor. Adam then tells Samus that her Metroid DNA has awakened inside of her, allowing her to siphon power like a Metroid. And can I say, that's really fucking cool. Samus is basically a walking petri dish at this point, so you know what? If we want her to give the suck to her enemies, I'm cool with that. Ravenbeak has retreated to Itarash, a flying fortress above Hanubia, and Samus, powerbombing through the bridge I mentioned before, can head up to confront him. You can Shine Spark, or you can Screw Attack, it's your call. But not without one final ex-Chozo warrior fight to test us before the final battle. This fight is the same as the previous ones, except when you melee counter its shield, you will also have to grapple beam the shield to pull it apart. It's a tiny change, but I'm okay with it, and we get to see the badass finishing pose again, so I'm not complaining. Now, if you want to complete the game 100%, you are now free to go back and explore all areas of the game at your leisure. All the teleporters become linked to each other at this point, allowing you to basically go anywhere in the world. And you're also free to beat the game and then reload your save, as you'll always appear before the final boss. Getting 100% item completion in each region will unlock a special gallery picture on the main menu, and getting 100% item completion across the whole game unlocks another picture of Samus against all of her enemies from games past and present. I know some people prefer to collect a lot of power-ups during the course of the game, but for me, I'm a big fan of that endgame scavenger hunt where I get to just comb through areas and sweep up a bunch of upgrades. It's kind of why I like the relic hunt in Metroid Prime. So for me, getting to just go around the world and collect all of these upgrades was really satisfying. Probably not the best from a gameplay perspective, because ultimately most of the upgrades aren't even needed to beat the endgame, but that's just my subjective opinion rearing its head near the end of this review. But if you're ready, head up to Itarash, powerbomb this reactor, and head up this elevator for the final boss. And when we arrive, we're greeted with another Adam terminal? And he says we haven't just got the power of a Metroid, he says we are a Metroid. That's right, after 36 years, it's confirmed, we play as Metroid. But that's not all on this crazy roller coaster. It's revealed that the Chozo DNA inside Samus, that's been there pretty much since day one, was both donated by the Thohar tribe, which is why her Metroid DNA took so long to manifest following the fusion transfusion, but also the Morkin tribe. Do you see where this is going? The Metroids see the Morkin as natural enemies, so when Samus saw Ravenbeak for the first time, it awakened the killer instinct inside of Samus, and this whole journey across ZDR has been slowly awakening her Metroid abilities for this very moment. But at this point, Adam makes a mistake. Or well, he's made a mistake since the moment we first talked to him in Artaria at the start of the game. When was the last time Adam called Samus Lady? In Metroid Fusion, the Adam AI was based on Adam Malkovich, Samus's commander who passed away, who always referred to her in that fashion. We heard him call her lady on the elevator down right before they lost contact, but since then, nada. That's right, the whole game we have been talking to Ravenbeak. All of this was a test designed to awaken her powers and make her into the ultimate weapon. But if there's one thing we know about Samus Aran, she does not give a fuck. Alright, and Ravenbeak has a daughter complex. The Morkin DNA inside of Samus actually came from Ravenbeak himself, making him, in a sense, her donor father. This was overly dramatic, kinda unneeded, but when I thought about it, Star Wars pulled the same shit back in the 70s. This is just Luke, I am your father in a different coat of paint, given how Metroid has been inspired by movies like Alien and Star Wars in some places. I'm okay with it. Either way, Ravenbeak thinks he knows what's best, and he's ready to put us in our place. And so begins the toughest boss fight in the Metroid series, and my favorite boss in the game, by far. Ravenbeak has the largest moveset of any 2D boss I have fought in a very long time, and I'm going to explain all of his attacks, all of his phases, and more, so let's do this. Phase 1. Now, in my first playthrough, I mainly tried to use storm missiles because they seemingly did a lot of damage, but I learned during my Dread mode playthrough that one missile at a time works just as well. In Phase 1, he has 2 melee attacks he can use. The first is a 3-swing combo. You need to jump over him and flash shift to avoid it. If you get hit by the first swing, you'll be stuck against the wall trying to avoid the second and third hits. His second melee attack is a charged red punch. This one is counterable and is worth learning the timing for, as in the first phase, you do the most damage to Ravenbeak during grab sequences that happen when you counter him. With his arm cannon, he has 2 attacks in Phase 1. The first, he'll summon a black hole, which you can either destroy with your storm missiles, normal missiles, or a power bomb. I'd recommend the missiles. The black holes drop ammo and health when you break them, so you'll get your ammo back anyway. His other attack involves him pointing his cannon straight to the sky, and then launching a beam attack that covers the whole screen aside from the sides right next to him. Get up close and be ready to dodge the attack after, because he'll often switch to his melee combo as soon as he's done. In Phase 1, you want to damage Ravenbeak so that he performs this room-wide beam attack that you can duck under. This triggers a grab sequence where you can counter Ravenbeak and begin pumping him with either missiles or wave beam fire for massive damage. Now, most players will experience this part of the fight. Ravenbeak will retreat and turn gold. And in this instance, you can't damage him. You have to avoid his attacks until he decides to taunt you. Then you approach, counter, and do more damage. I actually struggled with the timing of this attack at first. I knew what the game wanted, I was just pressing the counter button too late. I know some people will get upset that they have to use the counter to do damage to Ravenbeak in this form, but hey, it's a part of Samus's moveset, and this final boss really challenges every aspect of Samus's gameplay. Phase 2 doesn't use the counter at all, and Phase 3 only uses it for the melee attack mentioned before and the final blow at the end of the fight, so I don't see an issue here. That being said, if you want to skip this gold portion of the fight though, you can. Just follow these instructions exactly. When you start the fight, shoot exactly 8 single ice missiles into Ravenbeak. No more, no less. Afterwards, dodge his attacks until he uses his red melee counterable attack and counter it. Then, during the grab sequence, pelt him with as many wave beam shots as you possibly can. No missiles, just the wave beam. The beam will fire as fast as you press the button, so mash like your life depends on it. Then afterwards, shoot him with 2 more missiles, wait for the room-wide beam attack, counter him, and shoot him with wave beam bullets again. If you did this correctly, you will knock him straight into Phase 2, skipping the gold portion of the fight. In Phase 2, Ravenbeak will take to the air, sprouting wings and changing his moveset completely. And this was, for me, the toughest phase to learn, as there's a lot of movement and a lot of precise dodging on your part. It gets rough. He has two laser attacks in this form, the first being a rapid-fire volley where he'll track your movement for a few seconds, and then begin to pepper you with bullets. The best way to dodge is to jump around him in a circular pattern, getting hits in where you can until he stops. There is a secondary way of avoiding this attack, but it's technically more of a glitch. I'll show it on screen here. It involves a melee counter, and then crouching down, and then using the free aim button. It's not recommended for Dread mode, but for normal mode, if you're fast enough and you can pull this off, go for it. The second laser attack is a diagonal charged laser shot. You won't have a lot of time to react to this one, but the rule of thumb is flash shift underneath him when he uses it, that way you have a brief window to get some damage in. While flying, he has two melee attacks, a sideward swoop where he'll launch into one of the walls, often you can avoid this attack by sliding underneath him, very effective, and he has a downward dive where he'll fly above you and attempt to stomp on you, flash shift out of your way to avoid this. He's got a lot of HP in this phase, and there's no attacks that give you resources or counterable opportunities, so you just have to outlast him until he hits phase 3. At this point, he becomes motherfucking Sephiroth for a brief moment. I was very hyped, but then he rips the wing off and we're back to ground combat. This final phase is similar to phase 1, except his attacks are far more aggressive, and he has a few new tricks on top of the ones we've already seen. The biggest new attack is the yellow energy orb. It looks like a sun and will fire energy blasts outwards into the arena if not dealt with. It can be destroyed with a single power bomb though, and this is why you need to save your power bombs, because when destroyed, the sun gives you ammo and health. He also takes his charged laser beam and targets you with it. You want to bait the beam and then jump over it when it fires, and he can launch up to 3 at a time, so be careful. It's his fast melee attacks though that make this phase so much more brutal. He can triangle dash across the arena, which will often pair with a melee attack against you. It's like his own version of the flash shift, but worse than that, he can shine spark, and these attacks are so fast, they are the reason I struggled in Dread mode. But as long as you are doing damage, peppering him with missiles and bullets, you'll hopefully trigger one last cinematic cutscene where you need to perform 2 counters, and if you do this, well, you've basically won the battle. This triggers an intense cutscene where Ravenbeak overpowers Samus, and for a moment, it looks like he's killed her. But no, this is a woman too angry to die, and Samus just starts screaming like a banshee. I love it. It's when they cut away from the fight to a shot of the ship falling outside, and the scream just cuts, only for them to cut back, and then the scream continues. It's fantastic. And upon the ship crashing, because yes, she is that angry, we get to see the Metroid suit. I don't know about you guys, but this is the coolest suit Samus has ever had, bar none. Some think it's over the top, but I honestly think it's perfect. It's alien, the color scheme is Metroid to a T. I'm honestly sad there wasn't an unlockable skin so we could play the whole game in this suit. That would have been amazing. Imagine having this suit as an alternate skin in Smash Ultimate. It sucks that we'll probably never see it again. Back on Hanubia, Ravenbeak is infected with an X, and Samus, well, I'm just gonna show you. Just watch. With her powers as a fully fledged Metroid, she can destroy the X-Parasites, something nobody has been able to do. Before this she could absorb them, but this is entirely different. But so we get to the classic Metroid Final Escape sequence. We have a big ass laser, infinite power bombs, and everything dies when it comes into contact with us. It's badass, it's exciting, and it's a perfect way to cap off Metroid Dread. The route to escape is full of twists and turns, and you may see yourself coming down to the wire on your first go around, but I just think it's a fantastic way to send off Samus. This culminates in us at our ship about to leave when the real Adam tells us no, if we try to activate the ship in our current state, Samus will just drain it of energy with her Metroid DNA. Luckily, bet you forgot about this one, Quiet Robe, under the influence of the X, appears behind Samus and, well, he thanks her for her work, before bestowing his Thohar DNA upon her, taming the Metroid DNA, reversing the transformation, and allowing her to escape ZDR before it explodes. Side note though, but how did one ship crashing cause the whole planet to fall out of balance? I swear, everywhere Samus goes there's an explosion. This woman is a walking suit of death. But with that, Metroid Dread comes to an epic close. Now, do I wish we had a small briefing with Adam or a report from Samus to wrap things up neat and tidy? Yes. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter to me. I was mainly here for the gameplay, and Dread played wonderfully. Naturally, the clear rewards for beating the game in a certain time return, this time being gallery images of Samus's past adventures. I unlocked the Zero Mission one for my first playthrough, and for a second I thought that I'd actually unlocked like a Zero Mission ROM in the menu, like you'd be able to play Zero Mission through Metroid Dread. But no, it was just a picture. There were 3 images to collect for normal mode, and 3 images to collect for hard mode. 2 are obtained for beating the game on either difficulty, 2 are obtained for beating each difficulty in under 8 hours, and 2 are obtained by beating the game in under 4 hours. Obtaining all 6 will net you a special Zero Suit Samus picture, capping off the adventure in classic Metroid fashion. And this is the first game in a very long time that I replayed multiple times. I've done 5 playthroughs before writing this script, and I did a 6th playthrough recorded so that I could show off different skips and tricks I'd learned while playing the game. I don't replay a lot of games, period. I don't have the time. So if I've replayed this title multiple times, well, that really says it all. For me, this is the best Metroid game in terms of gameplay and control in the series. There is no competition. Super Metroid and Zero Mission will always be the 2 biggest games for speedrunners and tech glitches and that whole scene, but Dread is the first game in the series that got me to understand that side of the community more. And I've played all the 2D Metroids now, aside from Samus Returns and the OG NES game, so I can safely say Metroid Dread is my favorite 2D Metroid game and one of my favorite Metroidvanias of all time. Hollow Knight and Metroid Prime definitely have competition. The presentation of Dread is fantastic, from the clean visual style, the animations of Samus and everything around her, and even the music is pretty good. It's not memorable, I can't really think of any area tracks off the top of my head when I'm not playing the game, but when I do hear them in-game, they are fitting and fun. The Emmy Zone music being an exception. I love those beeps and boops. That chase music is very Windows blue screen. Power-ups could have used a bit more usage towards the end game. I wouldn't have complained if Hanubia were maybe a little bit bigger and had a few more rooms to explore that use the cross bombs and maybe even the power bombs in unique ways, but look, I'm not a game designer, I'm a player. I don't really know how to end a video like this, it's fucking massive, so let me just say that Mercury's team have done a phenomenal job with Metroid Dread. I would never make a review this long about a game I didn't adore, and I adore Metroid Dread. There wasn't a dull moment. I think about complaints I have and realize that while playing the game, those complaints just melt away. That's very special. I can be critical about Metroid Dread, and trust me, if you ask me for my opinion, I'm very good at giving negative feedback, but I don't care this time. Because of this, Metroid Dread to me is, while not flawless, worthy of a 100% score on my personal review scale, because at the end of the day, there is never going to be a perfect video game. The idea of a perfect video game is bullshit because opinion is subjective and there's no game that will appeal to everyone on Earth except maybe Connect 4. So for me, a top score, a 100 out of 100, a 10 out of 10, best game ever, it doesn't mean a perfect game. It just means a game that you can tell has been made with love, care, and heart. And I am aware there were allegations against Mercury's team for not crediting the whole team, and yeah, fucking credit your employees, Jesus Christ, it's 2022, but people need to play this game. People need to buy this game, and people need to experience the love of Metroid. So, thank you for watching this video, guys. This was a big one. I don't know how long it's going to end up. It's currently just over 19,200 words, 39 pages. Oh, fucking hell. If you watch this whole thing, props to you, high five. Forgive me, I've got to plug my content now. I do have a Patreon that you can support if you want to see more large-scale video projects like this. I would be humbled and honored to have your support like these fine individuals have given me. Shout out to my €5 tier, you guys are amazing. Beyond that, please consider subscribing for more content if you want to see some shorter videos. I did a small review of Pokemon Legends Arceus and a video reviewing Bubsy for the SNES. Check them out, good stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm going for a rest. Bye-bye.